back together and get started again. I want to thank you for enduring to this hour, and it's exciting to share on this realm and these questions. The next panel is going to give a few minutes to explain why are they sitting at this table? What's their relationship to this topic of relational assessment? And then we have some designed questions that we'll be asking of them. So I'm going to let Adam start and just share a little bit of your story, and we're going to give you, because we want to make sure that we have time for the questions. It's been asked if we keep it to about 10 minutes. Is that good?
Well, yeah, my name is Adam McInturf. I think I'm sitting here because I have a brother. His name is Brendan. Brendan has cerebral palsy as well as some other developmental disabilities and complications that he deals with. Brendan lives with my wife and I. We're members of a small intentional community, and we live in a household with about 13 people altogether. And so Brendan's a member of our community and a part of our family. And I have part of what I prepared was a bit longer, so I'm going to cut it down a little bit. But part of what I have are some just general reflections on just the nature of relationships and disability, and a few ideas about just the way that family impacts the way that I think about disability. And I think the way most people who are in this room are here because we have some connection. We have some relational connection to disability, or we are ourselves disabled in some way. And so that perspective on family, for me, flows sort of naturally into a perspective on the church as family that is really important for our community, and something I think that is important for the scriptures. When the scripture thinks about church as family, as all of us are brothers and sisters, with God as our Father and Christ as our brother. So all of this might seem obvious that anybody that's writing or thinking about disability and theology has some kind of relational connection. It might seem obvious. If you've done any reading, most works in theology and disability start with some kind of anecdote about, why am I here writing about this? It might seem like common sense, and it is. People write about things that matter to them, things that they naturally connect with. But for the majority of people living in America today, if they don't have some kind of immediate connection, some kind of family connection to somebody with disabilities, chances are they don't think about it. If they don't have somebody in their family, or it's not their job to do it, they don't think about people with disabilities. They are in some ways invisible. Because I think, like anything else in the modern world, living with people with disabilities is optional. It's optional whether in your daily life you're going to encounter someone with disabilities, for most typically able people out there. So things are optional. But for me, I have a strong conviction about the church being a place where we receive our lives. We don't choose our lives. We are chosen by God, and we're placed in a situation where we're put into partnership with all kinds of people that God has placed us in partnership with, much like in family. You don't choose family. So we have this option of encountering people with disabilities, and I think we exercise the option for various different reasons, but the greatest among them is money. To put it simply and frankly, being involved with people who are disabled will in some way make you poorer. It will cost you in a literal financial way. Disabled people are an obstacle to the goal of maximizing productivity in a society where economy is its god. Our imaginations here in the modern West are so deeply and completely formed by a value system that prioritizes speed, prioritizes efficiency, prioritizes competency in ways that we simply cannot imagine people with cognitive or physical impairments that slow them down as being truly worthy of our time, let alone being vital and indispensable to our very nature, our very being as people in the body of Christ, as Paul says. So I want to think again about the absurdity of this broad category of disability. And I'm sorry, what's your name from Cedar Mill? Sorry, I caught you with your mouth. Linda, I really appreciate one of the things that you said, that labels, disability labels, are useful insofar as they gain access to services. But as far as describing a group of people, a category of humanity, they're absurd. Think about the diversity of, say, a young man with Down syndrome or an elderly woman with MS. What groups these people together? What really do they have in common, other than the fact that they don't meet the criteria that we have of what functioning people in society are, people that are productive, people that are useful, people that make the system flow smoothly, people that make money. Still, the absurdly broad scope of the disabled as covering basically anybody who doesn't comport with the assumptions of our economy, this, in a sense, is why abortions of Down syndrome babies in Iceland and increasingly throughout Europe are becoming just perfunctory. It's assumed that you do this. Because if you value human life with a cost-benefit analysis, there's no reason to bring into the world a life that will consume more physical resources than it produces. So it's in this context, I think, that for Christians, specifically for Christians, it is a gift and this is true for anybody, but specifically thinking about it as Christians, it's a gift to be born into a family where a person with a disability precedes you, where a person with a disability occupies a scape that occupies a place that they didn't have to justify, that they are just there because they are your brother, because they are your sister, because they are your son or daughter. And being in that space, I think, is privileged. In a sense, I don't want to venture too far afield, but I want to think about it as a sense of election, a sense of being chosen to occupy a certain space where you, by being born into a family with a person with disabilities, get exposed to a way of being human that most people in the modern West never get to see. They never get to experience it. And that is a privilege. I think it's a privilege in my personal life that my relationship with Brendan was revelatory of the ways of God to me in my life. And being his brother, in a sense, was the means of grace through which God revealed the gospel to me in a powerful way. In a sense, you could say that being Brendan's brother was the site of my election, in which I was chosen to bear witness to the unique grace of Brendan's non-normative, non-conforming humanity. And that witness shows forth the good news that we are all beloved of God because we don't meet the standards. We don't conform to the standards of society and civilization in one way or the other, but simply because we are beloved children of God, fearfully and wonderfully made by a creator who does not make mistakes. My parents took in my younger brother, Brendan, as an infant foster child when I was 3 years old. My first memory, literally my first memory, was the day that Brendan was brought to live with us as a foster child, just a baby that wouldn't stop crying. Brendan was officially adopted at 4 years later, and that was a decision that simply ratified what was already a relational reality for me. Brendan was my brother because I had never known a life without him. And that not knowing a life without him made it wasn't a decision, really. It was a decision for my wife and I before we got married, but as we had kind of embraced this life where Brendan was always going to be a part of my life. It wasn't really much of a decision for him to come and live with us because it was impossible for us to imagine our lives otherwise. I didn't find my way into a relationship with Brendan because I had high ideals or natural patience for people who were of different abilities than me. I found my way there because Brendan was always around. He was always, from the beginning, one that I had to structure my identity and my routines around. I came to know and value Brendan not because I had somehow rejected the logic of the world and its obsession with efficiency and so forth, there was no virtue of my own. I just needed a playmate, and there wasn't anybody else around. And so I made space for the playmate that was available to me, who was my brother. And in the process, came to value the uniqueness of his life. But to be honest, at many points, if there had been others available, I would have been more than happy to ditch my little brother. But for the most part, I was a lonely kid who needed somebody to play with. And Brendan had cerebral palsy, but we found ways to play. We found ways to wrestle, to play catch, for Brendan to figure out how to play catch with only one arm that was capable of catching and throwing. And I'm going to wrap it up here, but my main point is that family for me was this site of exposure to the grace of people with disabilities through no virtue of my own in a way that I never would have chosen, and that people throughout America are not choosing for the most part. What my invitation is, and what I think my witness is an invitation for the church to embrace its role as God's family, for the church to be a place where people with disabilities are fundamentally welcome, and where people get to be exposed to people with disabilities, because as members of God's family, we don't have choice about who gets to be a part of that family. All of God's children are welcome there. And in the process, we might get invited to renounce a number of things that I think have been holding us back from the true freedom of the gospel, things that are trappings of our Western society, like an obsession with efficiency, an obsession with production. And in accepting people with disabilities as our brothers and sisters, we might come to find ourselves accepted in new ways that are freeing for us as well. So.
Thank you, Adam. I'd like to just explain that we're nuancing this section a little bit differently than some of the other sessions. So they're going to be giving kind of more of a personal connection in an introductory fashion, and then we have some very specific questions that we will be asking of them as soon as they're done. So they're only going to be speaking for a few minutes each, and then we've got some questions we're going to address, and I'm sure there'll be lots of building on what Adam's already shared in those questions. So I'm going to have Heather go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll pass it on to Becky, and then we'll get into the questions.
Okay. So I got to speak a little bit earlier. For those of you that heard, I am with Stevens Place, an apartment community for adults with disabilities. A real quick how I got there, I think, is important. Growing up, my dad was a superintendent of schools and spent much of his time prior to being superintendent working with families and children with special needs in special education. And as a superintendent, would spend some weekends with the gym open at whatever school in his district as kind of a respite for those families. I, as a kid growing up, got to be in that gym playing with those kids. And so for me, growing up surrounded by kids with disabilities was really normal. It was awesome. And having two kids of my own, they're constantly at work with me because I think it's a great way to grow up, to get to be exposed, as you had said, so often we're not, to get to be exposed to people who are different than us. And so in working with our residents, I often talk about the fact that, and not minimizing what is going on in their life, but we all have disabilities. Mine are accommodated for in society, probably at every coffee shop along the way. And unfortunately, our residents' disabilities aren't accommodated for in society. And I think that's part of, why we're all here today is to say, how can we help make sure that as we move forward and as we grow as a community, that we can accommodate for people with disabilities in society and what those disabilities are and meet them where they are today. And this is, what I tell families when they come in. Our job is to meet your family member where they are today and then to support them and walk along with them and help them grow where they can, and where they can't, our job is to provide that support and make sure that they still get to live the life that you and I get to live every day without thinking about it. that we take for granted every day when we get up in the morning and get to do all the things that we get to do. And some days it's tougher because our back hurts or we didn't sleep well or whatever the case may be. But we get those things without thinking about it. And so it's our job at Stevens Place to make sure that our residents also get that, and with as little thought or effort as possible. So just kind of a quick introduction there.
Well, I'm going to let Becky share a little bit about her story, and it's fun because I know her son, Jeremy, and I've heard a little bit of the story of your journey, which is in many ways very heartbreaking, but I'm so glad you're here to share with us. So share us a little bit about why you're sitting in that seat.
Well, I'm sitting in this seat because my son, Jeremy, went to Multnomah, and Jeremy is one of my 4 children, and Jeremy was born while my husband was at Multnomah, and I had already graduated in the undergraduate program, and he was due 4 months after my husband's graduation, and he was born 3 weeks before my husband's graduation at 1 pound, 6 ounces. And he has a hidden disability. You cannot see it. He has mild cerebral palsy as well as other health conditions. And I remember coming to visit him one time when I was depressed. My husband would put me on a plane and say, go visit your sons. I'll take care of the other kids that we adopted. And he took me to dinner, or I think Paul took us to dinner. I don't think my son had any money, but I was kind of depressed. And Jeremy said, oh, I'm going to this group, and they work with people who don't fit the main church-like people. And he kind of told me about this professor, and I think I bellyached the whole dinner about people with disabilities. Now, there's marginalized people. The church doesn't want them. I'm going to sit here and tell you, the church doesn't want them, but neither does the world. But Jesus does, and they are part of the church. And you're showing me this was the best conference. This is on my bucket list. I can die now. Because the church, 10 years ago, I donated 2 books to the library, 2 of each copy. There is no disabled soul and autism in our church, to Multnomah's library. Because until the pastors and the leadership of the church make a decision that it is doctrinally sound, and it is, because my husband and I have spent our lives proving it's doctrinally sound, searching the scriptures, that people with disabilities are part of the family of God. And to not have them in a church is to have a dysfunctional church, in my opinion. Some of the things that were said to me, oh, I got to tell you, we adopted 2 girls after having one that spent the first 6 months of his life in the hospital and has had 13 surgeries and has some trauma from it all. We decided to adopt, and we adopted 2 twin baby girls that ended up having autism. And we were advised to reinstitutionalize them before we became too attached. And we chose not to. I chose to become an autism consultant, an ABA trainer, a teacher, DOE teacher, setting up a classroom environment. I went to every conference, either by what money I could spare or by twisting the arm of the Department of Education, that by law, they had to teach me to be an equal participant in my children's education, which is the law in the United States. But at church, people were saying things like, my daughters were severely autistic. Oh, they just need a good hard spanking. A good hard spanking would fit them. They had autism, attachment disorder, seizures. Church is not the place for people like Joy and Ruth. They don't belong here. You must not have been in God's will, Becky, when you adopted them, or you wouldn't be having all these problems. Oh, God's will. Oh, yeah, that's right. Permissive will, passive will, center will. Back to studying the scriptures. If they had the intelligence, that's why I love the answer, the guy that did the theology. If they don't have the intelligence to know God, they are not part of the family of God. What? You're telling me my daughters are like a cat? No way. You may be the pastor, but, and these were all said to me by leadership in the church. And my daughters are older. They'll be 30 on Tuesday. So I'm from a generation before most of you. So I want you to know the hurt that parents go through. But because of my grounding in the Word of God, my husband's grounding, I went to church because God said I needed to go to church. Every Christmas program, my daughters and I lived in rural Hawaii. We loaded up the van. The boys went to church with their father, and we drove around the island blasting kids' praise. And I never went to a Christmas program, children's Christmas program, because my daughters were not in it. And I couldn't handle it. I'd start crying. And so I just decided I'm not going. We're going to have church in the van. But I wanted my daughters to do everything that I wanted my sons to do, and that is be all that God created them to be and accomplish everything for which he put them on this earth to accomplish. Because in my opinion, there is nothing greater that one can do. My Bible tells me in Ephesians that my daughters and my sons are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared for them in advance. He made a plan for my daughters in advance. And every person that you know with a disability, he knit them together in their mother's womb, and he has a plan. Don't ever let that leave your thought. And so I just appreciate this conference. I want you to duplicate it in every city in the United States, and I want you to go to Hawaii. And I'll let you ask your questions, but my daughters are 30. I can tell you, let me give one quick story.
Go for it.
My daughters are 8. We come to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. We rotated. We took turns. My husband and I, we were the leaders in the church. The churches wanted me and my husband because we were Multnomanites. You know, we could teach. We taught. I was a children's church. I was a child evangelist. So I ran the program that my daughters were in. And my daughter ran up and hugged this old man, interim pastor, and said, "Hi, Pastor Longcore." And they didn't talk till they were over 5. They didn't talk at all, not a word. And she says, "I like your little T on your tie." And I said, "Ruthie, what did you say?" She said, "Dr. Longcore has a little T on his tie." And I said, "Ruthie, that's not a little T. Remember Children's Church? It's a cross. Jesus died on the cross, remember, to take away sin?" No kidding. She turned to the front of the church and she said, "It's not a little T. It's a cross for Jesus." That's the kind of communication problems that we are up against with people with disabilities. But I'm here to tell you, both my daughters know Jesus probably equally as much as anybody in this room.
Amen. Oh, wow. Okay, there's so many questions I want to talk to you about. But anyway, I want to assure you that this conference is not ending here. And one place that it's at least a portion of it, as much as we can, is planning to go to Ukraine. And so we're hoping that we can spread this word to many other people that are in situations so that our kids don't experience what you've just explained. I'm going to go to question number 2, and feel free for any of the 3 of you to jump in and respond to this, and that's so often our society focuses on fixing people's disabilities, and how would you encourage us to attend not just to simply biology, but also to sociology and relationships? In other words, maybe we need to move beyond fixation with biology, no matter how important physical adaptation and transformation is, to complementarily and with affirmation of social transformation, look at the perceptions of how the disability community is seen. And what do you think it might look like if we changed that, so that in our own personal relationships, and what kind of lens do we use when we're engaging people with disability? Grab a mic and go for it.
I'm always eager to talk when it comes to disabilities. It's my passion. The pastor. It starts with the pastor. Anybody here who is a pastor and you have no experience with somebody with disabilities, I'd like to invite you to my house for dinner. You just come up to me after and say, I'm a pastor of a church and I've never been around anybody with disabilities. I want to see what it's like. I would love to have you over for dinner. Every single Christian should have at least one friend, if not more, who has a disability. Every single Christian. You will be changed. You will see God like you never saw God before. And then socially, the world thinks you're crazy because, as our brothers said, there's no value in somebody who takes more than they give. And you just have to accept that that's what they think of you and blow it off and know what God says. And it is, in churches, a very slow learning, empty place for parents of people with disabilities. I told the women in my church, I want to talk to you. I want to get to know you. But I have both my hands full. So come and talk to me, because I'm trying to stay out of the mainstream with my autistic daughters so they won't tantrum. So socially within a church, people with disabilities, the parents are usually lonely. They usually don't have a lot of friends. Just call them up on the telephone. They can watch their kids and talk on the phone at the same time. So that's how I think it affects socially.
And they're busy. They're very busy parents. Yeah. So help them out. I think for me, I encourage people to look at those with disabilities not as somebody with a disability, but somebody with a difference. And I think part of what we heard is so true. We really need to surround ourselves with people with disabilities, because once you take the time, we're scared of what we don't know. So if you haven't been around people with disabilities, it can be a scary thing for you. But if you've gotten the fortune to be around people with disabilities, what you realize is, one, it's definitely not scary. It's actually probably the most exciting and enlightening thing that you can do. They bring a lot to the world that I think sometimes we get so busy and caught up in our lives that somebody with a disability has such a uniqueness to not do that. So appreciating that. But stopping to look at somebody with a disability is not somebody with a disability, but somebody with a difference. And if we look around the room, all of us are different. And we're pretty good at accommodating for the differences between the two of us. I don't have facial hair like you do. You don't have hair like me. Yeah. He said it first, so I thought it was okay. But we're all different, and we accept each other's differences so easily when you walk out that door, and looking at somebody with a disability and accepting their differences too, and learning from them, taking the time to talk to them and understand their differences, you get to see a whole world that you never thought you'd get to see before, because people with disabilities look at things so differently than the rest of us, and many times because of how we've treated them. So stop and think about that for a moment. Many times because of how we've treated them, but also because they get to experience things in a way that we don't. So I would say first that, and look at those differences in the same way that you would support a friend in need, or a friend who had a different whatever than you, and provide the supports in those moments. I think, sometimes we don't think about disabilities as simply as that, and yet we should, because it's really not a big deal. But we don't see it enough to know that it's not a big deal. So stopping to look at the different point of view that they bring to the table, the different strengths that they bring to the table. Again, they look at things so differently than we do. And when you see the strengths that they have, utilizing and accepting those strengths. I have a resident who, she can tell you what time every day so-and-so's coming, and if they're late, I know who's supposed to be when and where. And if that was something that I took for granted, I think, I'd think nothing of it. It would be just another part of my day. And yet I know that I can live my day and know who's supposed to be where and what's going on and what's right and what's wrong because of her abilities that she brings to us as a community. And being able to stop in that moment and appreciate what she's bringing to the table, what she's bringing to the community that we have, is huge. And I think all of us can do that. We do that with our friends. We're appreciative of, our friend who always has a hug for us, or who always takes the time to reach out and give us a call and say thanks. But stopping and thinking about that person who knows the schedule, who knows the person who's walking in the door, and can say a great welcome to them. And then, I think I mentioned it. I think so often we've done a not so great job at supporting disabilities that, in fact, a really bad job, that people with disabilities have been teased and they have been pushed out of what the rest of us have experienced, that they bring an entirely different perspective to the table. They see things that we don't. They understand people in a way that we don't, because they have seen people for so long from the outside. And if you stop, just like with anybody else in the world, but if you stop to take the time to get to know them and listen to them and what they have to say, they are going to tell you a lot that you did not know. You will reap the benefits of those friendships and the understanding. So, again, if I just simplified everything, I would say it's not a disability, it's a difference. And learning to accept those differences and appreciate them for what they are should be the role that all of us play in disability.
Go for it, Adam.
Yeah, I think I resonate deeply with what you both shared about the unique perspective that people with disabilities are able to offer, and the unique kind of presence that people with disabilities are able to offer in a way that is difficult to quantify. And anytime we try to communicate, we always want to try and quantify things and put a reason, like why is it important for there to be disabled people in your life? And presence is one of those things that you cannot quantify. You cannot quantify what is important about being present with someone who has a disability, who sees things differently than you do. And I mean, one anecdote that kind of, I think, brings out this kind of dynamic is my wife and I were having dinner with a number of people, among whom was a man who's a pastor and a preacher and a writer who also does healing ministry. And he has he's an amazing person and has a really powerful witness, but he has a take on healing, and that I think is very important for the church, and I believe in the miraculous. I'm cool with all that in a certain way, but when he asked a few questions about our lives, and I told him that, my brother has cerebral palsy and some other developmental disability, his immediate response was to tell me a story about a healing crusade they had done in Romania, where there was a young man in a wheelchair with cerebral palsy, and as a result of their healing ministry, he got up out of his chair and walked. And the import of the story was to try to inspire and encourage my faith to believe for my brother and pray for him that he would do the same. And so I don't think he had any bad intentions in sharing that, but in reflecting on that, my wife and I, through a lot of tears, I would add, had to really think about and consider the question, does Brendan need to be healed? Is cerebral palsy something that he needs to be healed from? Is it like leukemia? And that is not a simple question, because Brendan does experience a lot of anguish and a lot of suffering because of his disability, and I don't underplay that at all. And so it's not as easy as just saying his presence is important, but it also was a real challenge for us to think about if he all of a sudden inhabited a typical body and a typical cognition, he would be a very different person. His relationship with our kids would be very different. And Uncle Brendan would be now all of a sudden among the adults who are distanced and removed. And Brendan would occupy a very different space and presence. And in a sense, so that question isn't exactly resolved. Is Brendan's disability something we should celebrate or something we should mourn, in terms of what he struggles with and what he suffers. But I'm thankful that, embracing the stance of humility that Dr. Potter offered, I don't think we have to resolve that question. I think our prayer in the meantime can just be, Lord, help us to receive our brother as he is right now and learn to value his presence and learn from him as he is right now. And value the actual contributions that he has right now. So,
great. One of the questions kind of leads into what you just addressed, Adam, is what are one or two items you would like to share with our conference attendees concerning personal relationships that involve people with disabilities? So it's your own personal relationships. And it might be interesting to also see how these individuals, what roles the individuals that you're attached to have within your family units, within your church, within your, the broader spectrum of the community. And not to say that they have to be qualified, but just to say, what is that heartbeat that happens when you're in a relationship with these individuals?
At the church that we go to now in Portland, it's just a very small little church of about 30 people. And there's nothing in particular for my daughters. My older son went there. I didn't want to try to church shop. It's just too hard when you have disabled family members, and my husband wasn't here yet. And so I run the children's church, and my daughters come with me, and my daughters can quote all the Bible verses. So I teach 8 kids exactly what I want my girls to learn about the Bible. But when I was in a church where the pastor knew my daughter, his daughter worked as a one-on-one aide with both my daughters. He knew she could play the piano. He knew she had hyperlexia, which is the opposite of dyslexia. So she would read scripture. He would have her read scripture in church and play the piano at Christmas, because she could play every Christmas song. And he would have them quote Bible verses together. And they would go into the senior citizens' homes. I would take them because I taught them, you have to give back. We have to give back. Everything's about giving back and helping others. And Jesus wants us to help other people. So they would go play the piano and say their verses in the old folks' home, and the old folks loved it. Then we went to the Veterans Hospital, and they loved it. So that's how my life is with them. I have aides that say to me, "Oh my goodness, the songs they're singing remind me of my childhood. I used to go to church, but I don't go anymore." And when my girls do volunteer cleaning, because I taught them how to clean because I knew I was going to get old and they're going to need to take care of me, when they clean, they sing. They sing. And when they're in their chill space, we have a chill space at our house, they sing. And, you'll just hear, "Oh, how I love Jesus," coming from upstairs. And, when you're the mother and you're downstairs and you're watching the news, it's chicken skin. Do you guys say that on the mainland? That's a Hawaii, sorry. But I did want to say that both my girls are visual learners, and so I teach them Bible verses through music, through some American Sign, and just plain motions I make up. I teach them through rhythm. And the hardest part of being a parent of a disabled person is, guess what? They're going to get old, and you're going to get old, and you're going to die. And they're going to be left. And I see some head shaking. That's why networking, a couple of people have said that word, amongst Christian families that have disabled members, so that we can have places like yours, is so important, because there are strategies of things that need to be in place for you to keep your child in Jesus. And I have made a life book for each of my girls that has a troubleshooting. When she says this, it means this, do this. Because when you have autism, you don't talk the same language. And it tells in here that I'm a Christian, so if you say a bad word, I'm probably going to say to you, "That was a bad word. You really shouldn't say that." And if you say you're sick, my daughter will say, "Okay, let's pray. I will pray for you," and she will pray for you. So I had to map it out to leave it behind.
Thank you.
I'll just share a story with one of our residents that I think, you talk about from a family perspective, and I'm coming from a perspective where we work with people with disabilities. I don't have a family member with disabilities, but it shouldn't just be you and me who are helping support and grow people with disabilities, but it should be all of us. And I'm going to use this story as kind of an example of, I think, maybe how we can all do that. We have a resident who had been with us for about a year and had a very strong voice. Some people like that, some people don't. I love it. I think when people can speak out loud and share their thoughts willingly, it's much appreciated. And I feel like one of the jobs that I have at Stevens Place is really to look at our residents and, again, accept them where they are and see how can they grow? How can we help them grow? We all need people like that in our lives. And so I said to this gal one day, I said, we have a breakfast that we're sponsoring, and I'd really like you to go with me to this breakfast, because this organization does a really good job of giving people with disabilities a voice and teaching them to be self-advocates. And I think if there's one thing that all of our residents need to be really strong in, is being a self-advocate and speaking that in whatever way speaking looks for them. I said, so we're going to go to this breakfast. I want you to just watch this, and then let's talk about it afterwards, and let's see what your thoughts are. So we go to breakfast, and she as we're driving away, says, "I've always wanted to go to college." And I thought, okay, I love this. Tell me more. And she has parents who are in the medical profession, family. The entire family is in the medical profession. She said, I would really love to try to become a medical assistant. It's something that I've always wanted to do. I said, great. Okay, well, as we get started with that, here's some other thoughts I have on how we could use your voice. And how do you feel about those? And so we really started working on those things. As an organization then, it was our job to say, how can we make this happen for her? And it wasn't our job to say, you have a disability. College might not be the right thing for you. Or that's going to be really difficult. Have you thought about that? It's not any of our jobs in our relationships with our friends and friendships. I mean, we all probably have that one person who sometimes looks at us and gives us reality. But isn't it to support and encourage and uplift? So our team, pretty fantastic, helped her go through the application process, apply for financial aid. She started classes in January. And I tell this story for a few reasons. One, because I think we have to experience friendship with somebody with a disability, not just seeing it through how we see them, how they want to see themselves, and the goals that they have in life and how we can support those goals. But two, because I want to tell you that 2 weeks ago she came to me and she said, I'm failing out of college. And I said, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. Tell me more about that. And she said, it's fantastic. I'm failing out of college. Did you not hear me? And I said, yeah, well, what does that look like? And she said, I got a C on my paper, and my professor told me I had to go to writing lab. And I sat there and I said, do you know how many people have gotten a C on a paper and have been told they have to go to writing lab? And this is failing out of college for you. I mean, how many people have experienced this? And not because she felt like she was failing do I share that. I share that because that is her standard for herself. And it's our job and has been our job, and I think we did a good job, to help her achieve that standard for herself and then experience real life. And so it's not just the job of a parent, it's not just the job of a family member or somebody that works with somebody with a disability, but it's the job of all of us to stop and listen to what they're saying, to stop and listen to the nonverbal communication that we're getting, and figure out how we can support them and lift them up in the best way possible to being who they truly can be. Anyway.
Go ahead, and we have just like about one more minute.
Yeah, I think, well, I'll just share something real quick, is that, I think that, I think that part of valuing people with disabilities is, in a sense, renouncing some of the other values that we have. There's I think, a work of like repentance that we have to do, where we have valued the wealthy, we have valued the fashionable, we have valued so many things that I think make it so that people with disabilities don't have any place in our lives and in our church. And so for us, one concrete example where I think in our church where we're able to value people with disabilities, and particularly my brother, is just the fact that for us, we try to focus. We share a meal together at the beginning of our gathered worship as the Lord's Supper, is the way we kind of read the Bible. And so that meal for us is the most important part of our gathering. That's the meal where we sit down at table with our Lord. And the most important thing that any one of us does in that gathering, whatever we've brought to share, whatever good song we have, the most important thing that we do is we sit down at that meal and receive the gift of the hospitality of our God. And that's a place where if we truly believe that of ourselves, it's no stretch and it's no extra thing to say that it's also true of a person of any other kind of disability sitting down at that table. And there are various different ways. I'm not saying that every church has to share a meal together, even though I think that's a good idea. But it is the case that we have to restructure our values in a certain way where we truly do come to a place where we believe for us as well as for other people, that just being there, just you being you, to quote Mr. Rogers, is what makes God love us. So
great. And so we could go on because there's lots of other questions we could go into. And I would really encourage these folks to respond more as we connect and as we email and get response back into how we're going to framework how we look at the future, how we look at our communities and our environments, and how we can be more embracing and understanding to people with disabilities. So that being said, there are water bottles waiting for you. There is people in the display areas back that you can further more conversations with these folks as others. We're going to be right back promptly at 4 so we can finish up. So go ahead and we will, I've got an announcement. Okay, so then we'll be finishing up this last session that's going to be talking about networking. And honestly, networking is going to say, what's next? What do we do from here? Where do we go? And Lauren and I will be addressing that from not only a church perspective, but also from an educational and a secular perspective as to how we move forward in our respective communities and make a difference, and how we continue this conversation from this point on. Be back at 4.